She stood in the rain with proof of his child in her hand, and he let another woman through the door instead. What Cassian Vale threw away that night would cost him everything. This is the story of a man who built walls so high he forgot what he was keeping out, and a woman who finally stopped waiting for him to let her in. If this story pulls you in, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every second of this matters. Part 1. The Gate. The storm came in fast from the coast, the way the worst things always do. Without warning, without mercy, all at once. By the time Alara Vane reached the iron gates of the Vale estate, the rain was falling so hard it felt like the sky had given up trying to hold itself together. She sat in her car for a full 3 minutes with the engine idling, watching the water sheet down the windshield, watching the lights of the mansion burn gold and amber behind the tree line. Warm. Settled. Untouchable. The way Cassian Vale always managed to look from the outside. She had driven 40 minutes to get here. She had been trying to make this drive for 6 days. Her hand went to her coat pocket. The ultrasound photograph was still there, folded once along the center crease, slightly soft at the edges from how many times she had taken it out and put it back. She did not take it out now. She just needed to know it was there. Proof. Evidence. The thing that made this drive necessary instead of just desperate. Alara was not a woman who showed up uninvited. She had understood early in their marriage that Cassian's world operated on his schedule, his terms, his tolerance for disruption, which was near zero. She had learned to schedule conversations, to send messages before calling, to give him time to prepare for anything emotional, because Cassian Vale treated feelings the same way he treated hostile business acquisitions. He wanted advance notice so he could build his defenses before the thing arrived. She had stopped finding that charming approximately 2 years into a 4-year marriage. She pressed the intercom button on the gate panel. The speaker crackled. "Vale residents," said a male voice she didn't recognize. "New security staff." She had been gone 8 weeks and already the faces had changed. "It's Alara Vane," she said. "I need to speak with my husband." A pause. Too long to be someone checking a list. Long enough to be someone checking with someone else. "One moment, ma'am." She waited. The rain drummed on the roof of her car. She watched a branch tear loose from one of the oak trees lining the drive and skitter across the pavement. The gate stayed closed. The intercom crackled again. "Mr. Vale is currently indisposed. He asks if you could schedule a meeting through his assistant's office tomorrow morning." Alara sat with that for a second. Schedule a meeting. With her own husband. Through an assistant. To visit a house she had lived in for 4 years and still had a key to. Not that the key would do her any good with the new biometric lock she could see had been installed on the front door from where she sat. "I'm not here for a business meeting," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Tell him it's important. Tell him it cannot wait." Another pause, then, "I'll relay that, ma'am. Please hold." She held. 3 minutes passed. She counted them by the rhythm of the rain. Then the lights in the upper east wing of the mansion shifted. Movement behind the glass. She could see the silhouettes, the sharp, familiar outline of Cassian's shoulders, the particular way he held himself, like a man who had decided at age 20 that showing tension in his posture was a form of weakness. And beside him, closer than a colleague would stand, a woman. Smaller. Dark hair. Her hand on his arm with the casual ease of someone who had placed it there more than once. Alara watched them cross the window. She watched until they disappeared from view. The intercom crackled one final time. "Mr. Vale apologizes. He has guests this evening and isn't able to receive visitors. His assistant will contact you tomorrow to arrange." She clicked the intercom off. She sat there. Rain, the idle engine, the photograph in her pocket. She had told herself, driving here, that she would not cry. She had been very specific about that. She had done her crying 4 weeks ago, the night the nurse at the clinic had turned the monitor toward her, and she had seen it. The small, unmistakable flicker, the heartbeat that was both hers and not hers. And she had understood that her already complicated life had just become irreversibly more so. She had cried that night until her chest ached, and then she had stopped. She had made a decision. She had driven here to deliver news. Not to beg, not to make a scene, just to tell him, because whatever had broken between them, he had the right to know. And the gate did not open. Alara put the car in reverse. She pulled out of the estate's approach lane slowly, careful on the rain-slicked road, and she pointed the car back toward the highway. She did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind her worth looking at. She had gone maybe a mile when her phone lit up on the passenger seat. Unknown number, no contact, just a message. Turn back. You are not safe. She stared at it long enough to nearly drift into the other lane. She corrected, hands tight on the wheel, and looked back at the road. Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Wrong number, some other Alara with some other problem. Her second thought came a half-second later, and it was colder. What if it isn't? She kept driving. The highway was nearly empty. The storm had pushed most traffic off the roads. The streetlights were doing almost nothing against the rain. Her headlights caught the white lines on the asphalt and not much else. She was doing 62 when the engine died. Not sputtered, not stuttered, just died. The dashboard went dark. The power steering locked, and the car drifted with nothing but physics to guide it until she wrestled it to the shoulder and it stopped. Alara sat in the sudden silence with her heart slamming in her throat. She tried the ignition. Nothing. The car was completely dead. No lights, no radio, nothing. Not a battery problem. She knew what a dead battery felt like, and it didn't feel like this. This felt deliberate, the way all of the power abandoning a system at once felt deliberate. She picked up her phone to call for help. No signal. She checked twice. Moved it around the cabin the way people do when they're hoping a different position will change the physics of cell towers. Nothing. Full dead zone. The rain came down. She made herself breathe. She was on a highway shoulder in a dead car with no phone signal in the middle of a storm. That was the situation. That was what she had to work with. There were options. Flag a passing car. Walk. Wait for someone to see her hazard lights. Except her hazard lights were also dead. She could walk back toward the estate. The thought was almost funny. Or she could walk forward toward the nearest highway exit, which she was fairly certain was about a mile ahead. She was still deciding when she saw the figure in her side mirror. He was walking toward her car from the direction she'd come. Not a runner, not someone hurrying through the rain the way a person genuinely caught in a storm would move. Walking, steady, measured. A black jacket with the hood up. His face was covered with something. She couldn't make out detail in the mirror's reflection in the rain, but the shape of it was wrong for a scarf or a collar. Something deliberate. A mask. Alara's hand found the door handle. Don't be dramatic, she told herself. It's a person walking on a highway shoulder in the rain. He stopped 20 feet from her car and stood there, looking at her. She got out. She didn't make a conscious decision to run. Her body made it before her brain finished the calculation. She was out of the car and moving, not toward the road, not toward the distant lights of the highway exit, but toward the tree line. Some survival instinct older than logic had decided that darkness and density were better than open ground, and she had committed to that decision before she was fully certain it was the right one. The rain hit her the moment she was outside. Cold, hard, immediately soaking through her coat. The grass verge was waterlogged and her shoes sank into it with each step. Behind her, she heard nothing. No footsteps, no shouting, no commands. Just rain, just her own breath already coming fast and ragged. She crossed the tree line. The forest closed around her. She kept moving, one hand out to deflect branches, eyes fighting to adjust to the deeper dark. The photograph was still in her pocket. She was acutely aware of it, its size, its weight, its fragile paper edges. The way you become acutely aware of the most important thing you're carrying when you're running. She ran until a root caught her ankle and she went down hard on one knee, hands slapping into the wet ground. She stayed down for a moment, chest heaving, listening. Rain on leaves above her. The distant sound of the highway, muffled now, nothing moving. She pulled herself up and looked back through the trees toward the road. She could see her car, a dark shape on the shoulder. She could not see the figure. Her knee was bleeding. She could feel the wet warmth of it through her jeans. She pressed her back against the nearest tree and tried to think. The message. Turn back. You are not safe. Someone had sent it before her car died, before the figure appeared. That meant someone had known what was going to happen to her on this road, which meant the car and the signal and the man in the mask were not random. They were coordinated, staged, planned. Someone had planned this. Why? The question opened into a darkness that was harder to navigate than the forest. She had no enemies. She was not a powerful person. She was a structural engineer who had spent 4 years being the quiet, manageable wife of a man who did have enemies, many, carefully maintained, some of whom were people who had tried to get at Cassian through various means over the years. Security threats. Messages. One incident with a car 3 years ago that Cassian's people had handled so quickly and quietly she had never learned the full details. Is this about Cassian? She was 8 weeks pregnant with Cassian Vale's child, standing in a forest in the dark. And the question she should have asked before she drove to his gate tonight was whether showing up there, being seen at his gate, being turned away, and driving off alone, whether any of that had made her a target. A twig snapped somewhere to her left. She stopped breathing, held it. Another sound, not the sharp crack of a branch underfoot, but a slower, deliberate sound. Careful movement. Someone was in the forest with her. Elara pressed harder against the tree and looked left, straining her eyes against the dark. Rain made everything blur. Shapes shifted between the trunks. She looked for the specific wrongness of a human silhouette, the too regular outline, the unnatural negative space. There, 30 yards, moving toward her position but not directly, angling the way something hunting moves, working the geometry without rushing it. She ran again. This time she didn't bother with quiet. Quiet had become a luxury she couldn't afford. She ran hard, crashing through underbrush, branches catching at her coat and her hair, the ground uneven and treacherous under her feet. Her knees screamed. She ignored it. She was doing a single calculation with everything she had: distance, direction, escape. The forest had to end somewhere. Forest ended. She was not far enough from the highway to be deep in anything. This was a roadside wood, probably a quarter-mile deep at most before it hit farmland or another road or fencing. She just had to get through it. She heard running behind her, actual running now, fast. She changed direction, cutting left toward what looked like a gap between trees, and burst through into a narrow clearing and stopped dead. She was at the edge of a drop. The ground fell away 6 feet into a drainage channel, water running hard and fast from the storm. Not deep enough to kill her, but enough to break something if she landed wrong. Behind her, the running had stopped. She turned. The figure stood at the edge of the clearing. The mask was clearly visible now. Not a full covering, just the lower half of his face. His hood was down. He was looking at her with something she couldn't read from this distance. Something that wasn't quite the expression she expected from whatever she'd been imagining he was. He raised one hand, not reaching for her, raised it flat, like a signal, like, "Stop." "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. His voice was strained from running. "I sent the message. I'm trying to help you." Elara did not move away from the drop. "Then stop following me through a forest," she said. "I had to make sure you weren't followed." He reached up and pulled the mask down from his face. Young, late 20s, a cut above his left eyebrow, fresh, already beginning to bruise. "My name is Marco. I work for your husband. I work for Cassian Vale." She stared at him. "He doesn't know you're here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." A beat. "Mrs. Vale, Elara, there are people who have been watching you for 2 months. Not your husband's people. The other kind." He was still breathing hard, rain running down his face, his expression carrying something heavier than urgency. "When I saw you at the gate tonight, I knew they'd move. Your car didn't break down. It was killed remotely. The man on the highway is gone. I dealt with that before I came in after you. But there are more, and they know you're here." Elara looked at the drainage channel behind her. She looked at the man in front of her. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "If you work for Cassian, why didn't you just call him?" Marco's expression did something complicated, shifted, the way a face shifts when someone decides to tell you a truth they were hoping to avoid. "Because," he said, "if I call Cassian right now, 2 things will happen. He'll come for you. And he'll ask how they knew where you'd be tonight. He paused. The answer to that question is something I've been trying to understand for 6 weeks, and I'm afraid of what it means. He looked at her with absolute seriousness. Someone inside the Vale estate told them you were coming tonight. Someone who knew your movements. Someone who's been feeding information about you for months. The rain fell between them. Someone on the inside, Ilara said. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. The photograph was in her pocket. The baby was 8 weeks old. She was standing at the edge of a drainage ditch in a storm, being told by a stranger that the house she just tried to enter was already compromised, that the world she'd married into had reached out into the dark to find her even after she'd tried to leave it. What do we do? She said. Marco's jaw tightened. He looked over his shoulder once, quickly, then back at her. We move, he said. Right now, before they regroup. Ilara looked at the forest behind him, at the rain, at his bruised face and the certainty in his voice. She thought about the gate that hadn't opened. She thought about the silhouettes in the window. She thought about the heartbeat she'd seen on a screen 4 weeks ago, the small, insistent flutter that changed everything. Okay, she said, and she followed him into the dark. By the time they reached the edge of the tree line on the far side of the wood, Ilara had stopped feeling the rain. Not because it had let up. It hadn't. If anything, the storm had tightened. But because the cold had moved past sensation into something else, a numbness she was choosing to treat as useful. Marco moved ahead of her, fast but not reckless, pausing every 30 yards to listen before continuing. He was good at this. Practiced. Whoever he was inside Cassian's organization, he was not a man who spent his days behind a desk. How long have you been watching me? She asked, keeping her voice low. Since before you left the estate. He glanced back. Since the night you told Cassian you were leaving. That landed harder than she expected. He had me followed. Standard protocol for... He stopped himself. He didn't tell anyone why. Just that you were to be kept safe. Discreetly. Discreetly. The word had a particular quality in her husband's world. It meant without your knowledge. Without your consent. For your own protection, as defined by him, according to his assessment of the risk, applied without discussion. Standard protocol, she repeated. Marco didn't respond to her tone. He pushed through a section of low brush and emerged onto a gravel service road she wouldn't have known was there. A car was parked 60 yards down, dark, unremarkable. He headed for it. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere safe. I have a location, not connected to your husband or the estate. Clean. He opened the passenger door for her and looked at her over the roof of the car. His expression was direct, tired, carrying the weight of a man who had been holding something difficult for a long time. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right. Before tonight, the last 6 weeks since you've been away from the estate, did anyone contact you? Any unusual approach? Someone you didn't recognize? Anyone asking questions about Cassian? Ilara thought about the weeks in the small apartment she'd rented on the east side of the city, the careful, quiet life she'd been building, the prenatal appointments, the calls from her sister, the work she'd taken on remotely to keep herself occupied. No, she said. And then, wait. She thought about 3 weeks ago. The man in the coffee shop near her building, mid-40s, unremarkable face, who had sat near her twice and the second time had asked about her jacket, where she'd bought it, too ordinary a question to be suspicious, but slightly too pointed in a way she'd noticed and filed and moved on from. There was someone, she said slowly. I don't know if it means anything. Marco was very still. Tell me. She told him. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, his expression had gone somewhere past tense into something closer to resolved. He got into the car. It means something, he said quietly. He started the engine. In the pocket of her coat, the ultrasound photograph sat folded and waiting. Outside, the storm worked itself into something that felt personal. Ilara pressed her back against the passenger seat and watched the dark road unspool ahead of them and understood, with the clarity that comes only after the worst moments of your life have already started, that she had walked into the center of something much larger than a marriage gone cold. The question was, who had put her there? And whether the man behind those iron gates, the man who had not opened them, was part of the answer, or whether she still mattered enough to him to be part of the solution. She didn't know. She was no longer certain she knew anything about Cassian Vale. But Marco's phone rang 3 minutes later, and when he looked at the screen, the blood left his face in a way that frightened her more than the forest had. He didn't answer it. He stared at the number for a full 5 seconds, and then set the phone face down on the center console and drove faster. "What is it?" Alara said. His hands tightened on the wheel. "That's Evan Rourke," he said. "Cassian's chief of staff. His right hand." A pause that filled itself with the sound of rain and the engine in Alara's pulse. "He's the man who told them where you'd be tonight." Marco drove without speaking for 11 minutes. Alara counted them. Not deliberately. Her mind had locked onto the seconds the way it locked onto load calculations and structural tolerances when she was working through a problem that didn't have a clean solution. 11 minutes of rain and headlights, and Marco's hands white-knuckled on the wheel, and Evan Rourke's name sitting between them like something neither of them was ready to touch. She touched it first. "Tell me what you know about him," she said. Marco exhaled through his nose. "Not yet. That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting until we're inside, and I know we're clean." He checked the rearview mirror for the 4th time in as many minutes. "There's a lot I need to tell you, and I need to tell it once, correctly, without watching the road." Alara looked out the passenger window at the storm-blurred city moving past. She recognized the district. Industrial East Side, the kind of neighborhood that looked abandoned at night and merely depressed in the daytime. Warehouses converted to storage units, fencing topped with wire, the kind of street that didn't generate foot traffic and didn't invite attention. Marco pulled into the parking structure of what appeared to be a self-storage facility, drove to the 3rd level, and parked in a corner space with the car facing out. Old habit, the kind of positioning that left you options. He killed the engine. They sat for a moment in the particular silence of a car after a long drive, rain drumming on the concrete overhead, the structure amplifying it into something that sounded almost industrial. Marco reached into the back seat and produced a duffel bag. He set it on the console between them and opened it. A first aid kit, 2 prepaid phones still in packaging, a folded jacket, a thermos. He'd had this ready. This wasn't improvised. "You planned for me," Alara said. "I planned for the possibility." He opened the thermos and handed it to her. Hot tea, slightly stale, clearly been in there a while. She drank it anyway. "When I saw your car at the gate, I had maybe 30 seconds to decide whether to pull you back or let events run and follow. I pulled back too late. They'd already activated." "Who activated?" "The people watching you." He was pulling something from a side pocket of the bag, a tablet, older model, the kind that wouldn't be connected to anything traceable. He powered it on. "Alara, I need to tell you something first. Before the information, before the names, before any of it. I need you to understand why I didn't go to Cassian directly when I first found out." She looked at him. His face in the dim light of the parking structure was younger than it had seemed in the forest, early 30s at most, the cut over his eyes still seeping slightly. Someone had hit him hard enough to cut him, and he had kept moving. That told her something. "Say it," she said. "Because I didn't know if Cassian knew." He held her gaze. "I still don't. Not completely." The tea was warm in her hands. She held on to that. "You think my husband might be part of whatever this is. I think it's possible someone is using his organization without his knowledge. I think it's also possible, less likely, but possible, that something was arranged at a level above my clearance and below his visible involvement." He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a photograph, a parking garage, a time stamp from 6 weeks ago, 2 men in conversation. One of them she didn't recognize. The other was Evan Rourke, Cassian's chief of staff, a trim man in his late 50s, silver-haired, the kind of man who looked permanently composed. She had met him at estate functions. He had always addressed her with the careful courtesy of someone who knew exactly how optional she was to the ecosystem. "Who's the other man?" she asked. "We're still working on that." Marco swiped to another image. A vehicle, a license plate, partially obscured. This plate traces to a shell company. The shell company traces through 3 jurisdictions before it goes dark. But the origin point... He paused. His jaw did something tight and controlled. The origin point, when I finally got there, connects to a name. Dorian Voss. Alara didn't recognize it. She said so. Marco looked at her like he was deciding how to carry something heavy across a room without dropping it. The Voss family ran the northeastern corridor of organized territory for about 15 years, he said. Not the kind of thing that makes news directly, the kind of thing that makes other things happen. Violence that looks unconnected, business arrangements that look legitimate, political influence that looks like ordinary lobbying. He turned the tablet face down on the console. Cassian dismantled them 4 years ago. Before you married him, or right around that time, it was not a clean process. What does that mean? It means people died. Not at Cassian's hand directly, but in the course of the dismantling. There were casualties. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to identify as the one he wore when he was about to say the part he'd been holding back. Dorian Voss lost his son, 18 years old. He was not involved in the family's operations. Wrong place, wrong time, caught in something that was aimed at someone else. Cassian's people. He stopped. There was never any acknowledgement, no accountability, because in that world, collateral damage doesn't generate lawsuits. It generates long memories. Alara set the thermos down carefully. And Dorian Voss has been waiting, she said. 4 years. He disappeared completely after the dismantling. Everyone assumed he was finished, broke, stripped of infrastructure, no longer relevant. Marco's voice carried the specific flatness of a man recounting the exact mistake that led to a disaster. He wasn't finished. He was rebuilding, and he found a way in. He tapped the tablet. Evan Rourke has a daughter, 23 years old. She was taken 11 days ago. Alara felt the weight of that land differently than the rest of it. Concrete and immediate, the weight of a person. Taken, she said. As in, kidnapped, held, leverage. Marco's voice didn't soften. Rourke has been feeding Voss information for 11 days to keep her alive. Your movements, your schedule, your location, everything he knew. A beat. Which was everything. Because Cassian keeps very few people fully informed and Rourke was one of them. And Rourke knew about you, including... He stopped. Including that I was pregnant, Alara said. The word fell into the car's interior and changed the air. Marco didn't flinch. Yes. How? Cassian's personal physician files reports. Rourke has access to those communications for scheduling purposes. Your appointment 3 weeks ago, the follow-up ultrasound, it went through the estate's medical coordination system. His expression was controlled, but his eyes were doing something she recognized as the specific look of a person who is angry at a system they cannot change. I don't know if Rourke understood what he was handing over. I don't know if he knew Voss would use you specifically, but Voss did. You became the clearest target, the person Cassian had pushed away, who was carrying something irreplaceable, who could be used without triggering his immediate defenses because you were no longer under his roof. Alara looked at the concrete wall in front of the car. Water was running down it in thin sheets from somewhere above. She was thinking about Rourke's face at the one function she had attended where she'd actually spoken to him, a dinner for a business associate 18 months ago. He had asked about her work. She had told him about a bridge project she was consulting on, and he had listened with what she'd taken for genuine interest. She had thought, this is one of the decent ones. In this world, this is one of the decent ones. His daughter, she said. I know, Marco said. He was trying to save his daughter. I know. His voice had the quality of a man who understood that and was carrying it alongside everything else without letting it change what needed to happen. That doesn't make the situation less dangerous. No, she agreed. It doesn't. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum. Not pain, something adjacent to it. The recognition that the world she had tried to exit carefully, diplomatically, without burning anything down, had been tracking her through a medical scheduling system. What do we do now? She said. We contact Cassian. You said you weren't sure about him. I'm less unsure than I was an hour ago. He picked up one of the prepaid phones and began unsealing the packaging. Someone with access to his inner circle set this up, but the execution tonight, moving on you directly, disabling your car, putting a man on that highway, Voss escalated. That means something changed. Either he doesn't trust Rourke's information to stay clean, or he has what he needs and he's moved to the next phase. He looked at her. Or he wanted you in hand before Cassian found out you were pregnant. Alara thought about that. The gate. The silhouette of the woman in the window. Cassian standing in his warm, amber-lit house, turning her away through an intercom. Cassian doesn't know, she said. No. He turned me away tonight, and he doesn't know why I came. No. She was quiet for a moment. Then calling him, she said, means telling him everything at once. Yes. The pregnancy, the threat, Rourke. Yes. She let out a breath that shook slightly at the end. She controlled the rest of it. All right, she said. Call him. Marco dialed. The phone rang twice. On the third ring, a voice answered. Not the voice she expected, not Cassian's, but a younger man's voice, tense, already activated. Who is this? The voice said. Security team. Night detail. Tell Cassian Vale that Marco Reyes is calling, Marco said. Tell him it's about Alara and it cannot wait. A pause. A muffled exchange. Then footsteps. The particular quick rhythm of someone moving through a large house with urgency. Then Cassian's voice. It had been 8 weeks since she'd heard it directly. Not through messages relayed by lawyers and assistants, but his actual voice. It was lower than she always remembered, controlled in a way that took work. Marco, what's happened? We have a situation. Are you secure? Hold on. A brief silence, then a door closing, the quality of the audio changing slightly, smaller room. Go. Marco laid it out with the efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this. He gave it clean. No softening, no cushioning. The surveillance. Rourke. The car on the highway. The forest. Voss. He gave it all. The silence on Cassian's end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Where is she? Cassian said. Safe. With me. Location is clean. I want an address. Not yet. I need to know who's in the building with you right now. Full names? I'll verify on my end. Another silence. This one different. The quality of a powerful man being told he doesn't get to be in charge of something, processing that fact. You don't trust my house, Cassian said. Not completely. Not right now. Because of Evan? Yes. The silence that followed that single syllable was the heaviest thing Alara had heard in years. She could hear it from where she sat. The particular weight of Cassian Vale understanding something that had broken through whatever composure he'd built around himself tonight. When he spoke again, his voice was different, still controlled. But the control was now doing harder work. I want to speak with her, he said. Marco looked at Alara. She held out her hand. He gave her the phone. Cassian, she said, are you hurt? My knee. Nothing serious. But He stopped. Started again. Are you? Another stop. The baby is fine, she said. I'm fine. The silence on his end had a texture to it. She'd been married to him long enough to know what that particular silence meant. It was the silence of Cassian Vale encountering something he had no prepared response for. The silence between the blow and the reaction, the half-second where the controlled man had to find new footing. You came tonight to tell me, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes. I didn't. His voice changed again, something rough cutting through the controlled surface. I didn't know it was you at the gate. I didn't look at who was. I know. Alara, not now, she said. Whatever this is between us, it's not the conversation for right now. Right now we have a problem, and we need to solve it. She heard her own voice and recognized it. The engineering voice. The voice she used when a load calculation came back wrong, and panic was not a useful tool. Marco says Voss has something planned. He wouldn't have moved on me tonight unless he was ready to move. That means we don't have time. A beat. Then something shifted in Cassian's voice. Shifted towards something she almost didn't recognize because she'd rarely seen it, had perhaps never fully seen it. Someone setting themselves aside. Completely. Tell me what you need, he said. She handed the phone back to Marco. They talked for 20 minutes. Cassian gave Marco the names of everyone in the estate: security staff, household, assistants. Marco ran them against something on the tablet, checking and cross-checking, asking specific questions about who had been in proximity to Rourke in the last 2 weeks. Cassian answered each question with a precision that told Alara he was already moving through the estate physically as he spoke, already separating the people he could trust from the architecture he wasn't sure about anymore. She listened, and she thought about Evan Rourke. Somewhere tonight, Rourke knew she had gotten away. He would know it the moment his contact with Voss's people told him the highway operation had failed. And then he would have a choice: keep the information from Cassian and hope Voss's people resolved it, or go to Cassian and confess, which meant protecting his daughter at the cost of everything else. She thought about what she would do. If it were her child, she thought, I already know what I would do. The conversation ended. Marco set the phone down and looked at her. Cassian is pulling his core team together. He's identified 4 people he's certain of, people Rourke would not have had access to directly. He's keeping the circle that small. He rubbed the back of his neck. Rourke is still in the estate. Cassian hasn't approached him. He's going to wait, Alara said. Yes. He wants to know what Rourke does when he thinks the highway operation failed. Marco nodded. If Rourke goes to Cassian on his own, comes clean, explains the daughter, that's one set of information. If he stays quiet and tries to manage it, then Cassian knows what Rourke decided to prioritize. Alara pressed her fingers against her knee, probing the injury through the denim. Tender, swollen, not broken. That's cold. It's accurate, Marco said. Cassian needs to know which version of Rourke he's dealing with. She couldn't argue with it. She didn't like it. They waited. At 12:47 in the morning, Marco's prepaid phone rang. He answered it, listened for 30 seconds without speaking, and then said, When? A pause. All right? He ended the call. Alara looked at him. Rourke went to Cassian, Marco said, 40 minutes ago. Walked into his office and told him everything. She let out a breath. His daughter, she said, is confirmed alive. Voss's people have her in a location Rourke doesn't know. He was given proof of life calls every 48 hours, but no location, so he has nothing to give us to find her. Marco's expression carried the weight of all the things that meant. Cassian is... He stopped, chose his words. He's not handling it in the obvious way. What does that mean? It means he didn't fire him, didn't have him removed. He's keeping Rourke inside the circle. He looked at her. He's going to use him. The thought settled over Alara like the cold that had been sitting in her bones since the forest. Cassian was going to use Rourke as a channel back to Voss, which meant Rourke was going to be in the position of feeding information in 2 directions, to Voss to keep his daughter alive, and to Cassian to coordinate the response, which meant Rourke's daughter's safety depended on Voss believing the information he was receiving was real, which meant one wrong move by any of them, one inconsistency, one detail that didn't track, and a 23-year-old woman died somewhere in the city. It's the only play, Marco said. He wasn't justifying it, just stating. I know, she said. And she did know. That was the worst part. She was beginning to understand the world she'd married into with a clarity that had been unavailable to her when she was living inside it. When she'd been inside it, it had mostly felt like coldness, like distance, like a husband who was always managing something she didn't have visibility into. From the outside, she could see the structure of it, the interlocking pressures and decisions and costs, the way every choice in that world had consequences that extended beyond the person making the choice. She had not chosen this world. She had chosen a man, and the man had come with the world attached, and now the world had come to find her in a forest. Her phone, her own phone, which had found signal at some point in the last hour, buzzed in her pocket. She'd forgotten she had it. She pulled it out, expecting Marco to react, but he was already watching, and his expression told her he'd factored in her phone's signal. The message was from an unknown number, different unknown number than the first one. Different, because the first one had been Marco. This one read, He won't save you in time, but I will offer you something simpler. Call this number and we talk. A phone number followed. Alara stared at it. Marco was beside her in 2 seconds, reading over her shoulder. She felt him go very still. "Don't call it," he said. "I know." He's trying to separate you from Cassian's response. "If you call—" "I know, Marco." She turned the phone face down on the console. Her hand was not entirely steady. "I'm not going to call it." But the message had done its work regardless, because it told her something Dorian Voss hadn't intended to give away. He didn't know where she was. He didn't have her location. The highway operation had failed, and she had disappeared into a gap in his surveillance, and he was reduced to sending messages to her phone and hoping she'd respond, which meant she was still free, still mobile, still one step ahead, barely, by the width of a drainage ditch and a stranger in a forest who'd known what was coming. She was trying to hold on to that. Then Marco's phone rang again. He answered it fast. This time the conversation lasted 90 seconds. His end was mostly silence, with 2 words inserted at intervals, confirmed and understood. When he hung up, his face had changed. The controlled, managed expression he'd been carrying all night had developed a crack in it. Not panic, not quite, but something close to the feeling you get when a situation moves faster than your ability to contain it. "What?" Alara said. Cassian's team ran the secondary surveillance, cameras around the estate, the approach roads, everything from the last 72 hours. He set the phone down. There was a vehicle. It maintained a position covering the gate from a distance of 400 meters, standard long view setup. A pause. It was gone by the time we checked, but the image capture from 6 hours ago was clean enough to pull. He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a camera still, like grainy, enhanced, the kind of image that required interpretation. A vehicle. And beside the vehicle, visible through a telephoto frame, a figure. Not a man she'd seen before. A woman. Younger than Dorian Voss's generation would have suggested. Dark coat. Standing beside the vehicle with a stillness that read as professional, not casual. Looking at the gate of the Vale estate with an expression the camera quality couldn't resolve into specific emotion, but the body language translated clearly enough. Patient, certain, waiting. "Who is that?" Alara asked. "We're not sure yet." Marco's voice was carrying something new. "But she was there for 6 hours. And she left at the same time your car arrived at the gate." Alara looked at the image. "She was watching me come," she said. "Yes. And when you were turned away, when you drove off, she made a call." He took the tablet back. Cassian's team triangulated the cell signal from the area at that timestamp. The call was 3 minutes long. The receiving number is... He stopped. "What?" "The receiving number is a line that traces to an address." He looked at her, and the crack in his expression had widened into something she didn't have a clean word for. An address inside Cassian's own estate. Not Rourke's personal line, not any line Rourke should have had access to. He put the tablet face down. "Someone else has been feeding Voss information. Someone we haven't identified yet. Someone still inside." The rain was still coming down. Outside the parking structure, it fell on a city that didn't know any of this was happening, where people were asleep or awake with ordinary problems, where the night was just weather and nothing more. Inside the car, Alara understood with the particular clarity that comes after enough shocks have accumulated that the situation had just changed shape again. Rourke's confession had felt like the edges of the problem becoming visible. But there was a second source, a second person inside Cassian's world who had been watching her, reporting her, making her a target, someone who hadn't come forward, someone who was still in position. Marco was already calling Cassian's secure line, but Alara was looking at the image on the tablet again. The woman in the dark coat, the patient stillness of her posture. And something was pulling at her. Something she couldn't name yet. A quality of the stance. A familiarity she couldn't place. She picked up the tablet. She looked at the image for a long time, and then the thing she couldn't name resolved itself into a shape she recognized, and the shape of it was worse than anything she'd processed tonight, because if she was right about what she was seeing, then the betrayal wasn't just inside Cassian's organization. It was inside his life in a way that would destroy him more completely than losing an empire. She opened her mouth to tell Marco. "Marco," Alara said. He was still on the phone. He held up one finger. "Wait." and kept talking, low and fast, coordinates and timelines and names she didn't recognize. She looked at the tablet, the woman in the dark coat, the stillness of her, the particular way she carried her weight on her left side, hip canted slightly, one shoulder fractionally lower than the other, an unconscious posture, the kind of thing a person couldn't fake because they didn't know they were doing it. Alara had seen that posture across a dinner table, across the marble foyer of the Vale estate, across the width of a charity function 2 years ago, where she had stood next to Cassian and shaken hands with people whose names she'd been briefed on in the car ride over. She had shaken this woman's hand. Marco. Her voice came out differently this time, flat and certain in a way that cut through his phone conversation. He looked at her. She turned the tablet toward him. Who manages Cassian's external relations? His above-board public-facing business contacts? Who handles that tier? He lowered the phone slightly. Cassian has a VP of External Affairs, Nadia Orel. She's been with the organization for about... He stopped. 3 years, Alara said. She joined 14 months before I left. I met her 4 times. She set the tablet on the console between them. That's her. Marco stared at the image. Then he brought the phone back to his ear and said, I need to call you back. He ended the call before the other person could respond. The parking structure was very quiet. Water ran somewhere in the drainage system above them, a thin, persistent sound. You're certain, Marco said. No. The image quality is poor and I only met her a few times, but the build, the posture... She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. If I'm wrong, we lose nothing by checking. If you're right, Cassian's VP of External Affairs has been running surveillance on his wife for an unknown period and feeding the information to the man who wants to destroy him. Marco's voice was doing the thing where it went completely level as a management strategy. And she has been inside his organization for 3 years. Yes, which means everything she's had access to in 3 years. Yes. He picked up his phone. He stared at it for a moment in a way that told her he was running calculations. Who to call, how to frame it, how much to reveal before he had confirmation, how to move fast enough to matter without moving so fast that a wrong step tipped Nadia Orel before they were ready. I'm calling Cassian directly, he said. Don't tell him who it might be. Not yet. Not until we're sure. She met his eyes. If it is her, he can't know until we have something solid. He'll react. He won't be able to help it. Marco looked at her with an expression she was starting to recognize as the one he used when she said something that aligned with exactly what he'd already been thinking. He called. 3 rings. Cassian picked up. We have a development, Marco said. I need you to pull Nadia Orel's access logs for the last 30 days. All of them. Building entry, system access, communications routed through estate servers. Tonight, now. A pause on Cassian's end. What are you seeing? I don't have confirmation yet. I need the logs before I give you a direction. Another pause, longer. Marco. The logs, Cassian, please. The word please, Alara thought, the specific work it was doing in that sentence. 30 minutes, Cassian said. He hung up. Marco set the phone down and looked at Alara with the careful expression of a man who was about to say something he didn't want to say. While we wait, he said, I need to ask you something about Nadia Orel, something specific. Go ahead. In the times you met her, the 4 meetings, did she ever ask you anything about your schedule, your plans, anything personal? Alara thought about it. The charity function, a dinner, 2 estate meetings she'd attended briefly before excusing herself. Nadia Orel had been professional, warm in the calibrated way of people whose warmth is a professional tool. She had asked, yes, she had asked about Alara's engineering work, about a project in the Northern District, about how long the consultation was expected to run. Alara had answered. She had been pleased in the way she was always slightly too pleased when someone in Cassian's world showed interest in the work she did outside it. She asked about my work schedule, Alara said. How specifically? Project timelines, when I'd be on site versus in the office. A pause. I told her. It seemed like small talk. Marco nodded slowly, and the nod had the quality of something being confirmed rather than learned. It wasn't small talk, he said. No. She had mapped Alara's movements through polite conversation. 3 years of access, 18 months of watching Alara specifically, long enough to understand her patterns, her habits, the predictable rhythms of a woman who believed she was operating in private. How did she connect to Voss? Alara said. I don't know yet. Could be ideological. The Voss family had significant reach before Cassian dismantled them, people who benefited from their infrastructure and lost that when they fell. Could be personal, could be financial. Marco's voice was factual, not cold. Could be that Dorian Voss is very good at finding people who have something to lose and offering them something that matters more than their current position. What does Nadia Orel have to lose? Marco looked at her steadily. That's the question, isn't it? He said. They waited. 26 minutes later, Marco's phone rang. He had it on speaker before the second ring ended. Cassian's voice came through clipped and specific, the voice of a man reading from something in front of him while processing what it means. Her building access, Cassian said. She was in the estate's private server wing 4 times in the last month. Not unusual for her role, but 2 of those times were after hours. After 11 p.m., both on nights when I was traveling. A pause. Her communications logs show a pattern of encrypted external messages routed through a third-party relay. The relay is one we use for legitimate operations, so the traffic didn't flag. But the recipient addresses... He stopped. The stop was meaningful. They don't match any of her authorized contacts. Cassian, Marco said. The camera, still from the estate perimeter footage, 6 hours ago. I'm sending it to your secure line now. He navigated the tablet, sent the file. Tell me if you recognize the figure. Silence. The particular silence of a man looking at something, then nothing for 10 full seconds. Then, where did this come from? The gate approach camera, 40 minutes before Alara arrived. She was... He stopped again. Stopped for a long time. She was watching the gate. Yes. She knew Alara was coming. We believe she may have known before Alara arrived, possibly been watching the estate in anticipation. Marco's voice was very careful, which suggests she knew, or was told, that Alara would attempt contact tonight. How would she? Cassian's voice stopped itself mid-sentence. The silence that followed had a quality to it that Alara recognized even through a phone speaker. The quality of a specific, terrible understanding arriving. Rourke, he said. She didn't need direct access to Rourke. She needed access to the system Rourke used. If they were both feeding Voss separately, they may not have known about each other, Marco said. 2 sources. Voss built 2 independent pipelines into my organization. A pause. He's more patient than I thought. Alara listened to this exchange and felt the architecture of it assembling in her mind. Dorian Voss had spent 4 years. 4 years building entry points into Cassian's world, cultivating sources, layering access. Rourke through threat and fear. Nadia through something else. Motivation they didn't know yet. 2 separate pipelines that didn't know about each other, which meant neither could accidentally expose the other. And together they gave Voss a depth of visibility that no single source could have provided. This wasn't revenge. This was construction. Patient, deliberate construction toward a specific outcome. He's going to call you, Alara said. Both men heard her. Marco looked at her. Through the phone, Cassian's silence acknowledged her. Voss, she continued, he's going to call you directly, tonight or tomorrow, because the highway operation failed and he knows I'm out of his reach for the moment. He'll want to reestablish leverage before his window closes. She was working through it as she spoke, the engineering mind that was most useful in crisis, not for its precision, but for its instinct about load and failure points. He'll make a demand, something that looks like a trade, something that forces you to choose between you and everything else, Cassian said. His voice, when he said it, had come apart slightly at the seams. Not much, barely audible. But she heard it. Yes, she said. I'm not going to choose everything else, he said. She didn't know what to do with that. She put it away for later, whatever later looked like, and stayed on the problem. Then we need to be ready before he calls, she said. Because once he calls and you respond, he'll know what you have and what you don't. Right now, he doesn't know about Marco, he doesn't know what we've uncovered, and he doesn't know that we've identified 2 sources inside your organization. She paused. That window is the only advantage we have. Marco was nodding. Cassian was silent in a way that meant he was already moving through the same logic. I need Nadia oral contained, Cassian said. Not alerted. Contained. I need her access suspended silently. No flags, nothing that pings her own devices. Can you do that without touching the estate systems directly? Yes, Marco said. I have a contact in the network security team, someone Rourke didn't know about. Do it now. A pause. And Marco, I need you to bring Alara somewhere I can actually get to, not the estate. Neutral ground, clean location, somewhere I can move a small team to without Voss's remaining surveillance catching the pattern. A beat. I need to see her. Marco looked at Alara. The question was in his expression. She thought about the gate. She thought about the intercom, and the silhouette in the window, and the voice that had come through the speaker saying Mr. Vale is currently indisposed. She thought about the voice she'd just heard through the phone, the seams showing in it. Tell him yes, she said. They moved. Marco drove for 40 minutes, doubling back twice through residential streets in a pattern she didn't try to track. He was on the phone for most of it. The network contact, a quick technical conversation she understood only in fragments, enough to know that Nadia Orel's access had been severed at the root level without any surface indication. As far as Nadia knew, her credentials still worked. As far as Voss knew, his second pipeline was still open. They arrived at a building she identified as a mid-tier commercial hotel, the kind with underground parking, enough turnover that unfamiliar vehicles didn't attract attention, the kind of lobby designed for anonymity. Marco had a room already arranged. He navigated the parking structure with the efficiency of someone who had used it before, and they went up through a service elevator that required a key card he already had. The room was small, clean, 2 chairs and a table near the window, with the curtains drawn. A first aid kit that Marco had apparently arranged to be here, same type as the one in the car, standard trauma kit, the kind that said this person plans for injuries as a matter of routine. Sit down, Marco said. She sat. He crouched in front of her and looked at her knee. I need to clean this, he said. She let him. The wound was uglier than she'd thought. A deep scrape along the kneecap with debris ground in from the forest floor. He worked on it with the focused attention of someone who wasn't squeamish about this kind of thing. And she sat with her hands in her lap and breathed through it and thought about Dorian Voss and what 4 years of patience looked like. She was thinking about the son. 18 years old, wrong place, wrong time. The particular cruelty of being collateral damage in a war you didn't choose to fight. She thought about her own child. 8 weeks old, a heartbeat she'd seen on a screen. She understood, sitting in that room with her knee being cleaned by a man she'd met in a forest, that she was no longer deciding whether to leave Cassian. She was deciding something much more fundamental, whether the world her child was going to be born into was safe enough to be born into, whether she could make it so, whether the man behind those iron gates was a resource or a liability in that calculation. She hadn't figured it out yet. She was still working on it when the door opened. She hadn't heard footsteps in the hall. Marco had. He was on his feet and turned before the door was halfway open, hand moving toward his jacket and then stopping. Cassian Vale walked into the room. He was not wearing what she'd seen him in through the window. He'd changed. Dark jacket, unremarkable, the kind of clothes designed not to be remembered. His hair was slightly wet from the rain. He had come fast, which meant he had left the estate fast, which meant he had trusted Marco's location without waiting for additional confirmation. He stopped when he saw her. She looked at him. There are moments in a long relationship when you see the person as they actually are, stripped of the accumulated projections and expectations and grievances, when they're just a human being standing in a room, tired and frightened and trying not to show it. She had not had one of those moments with Cassian in a long time. She was having one now. He looked older than 8 weeks ago, not in a measurable way, in the way of a man who has spent a night understanding what he almost lost. You're hurt, he said. I'm fine. Your knee. Marco took care of it. Cassian. She stopped herself from whatever came next, which was going to be something about the gate, about the window, about the woman whose hand had been on his arm. None of that was useful right now. Sit down, she said. We have a lot to go through. He sat. Not in the way he usually sat. That particular settled authority of a man who occupied rooms completely. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, the posture of someone who has decided to be smaller than their usual size. She noticed it. She didn't comment on it. Marco stood near the door and walked them through everything sequentially. The surveillance timeline, Rourke, the highway operation, Nadia Orel, the dual pipeline structure. Cassian listened without interrupting. His eyes moved between Marco and Alara, and occasionally to the drawn curtains, as if he could see through them to whatever was outside. When Marco finished, Cassian said, How did Nadia get to Voss? We don't know yet. I need to know. Not a demand. Something more fundamental than a demand. The specific need of a man trying to understand how completely he'd been wrong about something. She's been with the organization 3 years. I brought her in personally. I checked her references, her background, her... He stopped. I believed I knew her. You knew the version she showed you, Marco said. Not unkindly, but not softly either. Cassian looked at Alara. She asked you about your work, he said. I read Marco's notes on the drive over. Yes. And you answered. I answered. I had no reason not to. She met his eyes. She was your colleague. She seemed interested. She paused. I was trying to belong. In your world. To the people in it. A beat. It turns out I was useful to her in a different way than I thought. Cassian held her gaze and said nothing for a moment. The nothing carried weight. His phone rang. All 3 of them looked at it. Unknown number. The screen lit the space between them with pale blue light. Marco said, Don't answer. Cassian looked at the phone, then at Marco, then at Alara. It's him, Cassian said. Yes, Marco said. And you're not ready. If you answer now, he controls the... Cassian answered the phone. Marco closed his eyes briefly, opened them, moved to stand closer, angling to hear. Val. The voice that came through the speaker was unhurried, measured. The voice of a man who had been preparing what he was going to say for a long time and was in no rush to say it all at once. I thought about not calling tonight, giving you a few more hours to worry. A pause. But I've been patient for 4 years. I think I've earned the right to stop being patient. Cassian said nothing. Your wife is resourceful, the voice continued. More than I expected. I'll give her that. And whoever your man in the field is, he's good. A brief pause that contained something like professional acknowledgement. But I want you to think very carefully about what the next 72 hours look like if we don't come to an understanding tonight. What understanding? Cassian said. Simple one. You have something I want. Information. Specifically, the financial architecture of the Meridian accounts, the ones you used when you rebuilt after dismantling my family's operation. The routing, the entities, the structure. With that information, I rebuild. Without it, a pause. Without it, Rourke's daughter remains where she is, and your wife. The voice changed slightly. Not harder, more deliberate. Your wife will find that the city is a dangerous place for a woman in her condition. The room was very still. Cassian's jaw had gone rigid. The muscle at the corner of it was the only visible movement in his face. You're asking me to give you the means to reconstruct everything I spent years dismantling, Cassian said. I'm asking you to make a choice. Yes. A beat. I suspect you're not alone right now. I suspect your man is there, possibly my former asset as well. I want you to know that this call is being monitored and the result of this conversation will determine what instructions go out in the next hour, so choose carefully. The voice paused. You have until tomorrow midnight. Call this number with confirmation. If I don't hear from you, the situation with your wife escalates, and I mean that in the most direct possible sense. The line went dead. Cassian set the phone down. Marco was already at the window, angling to see the street below without moving the curtain. the instinctive check of a man trying to determine if their location had just been confirmed to the enemy. Alara watched Cassian. He was not moving. He was sitting forward in the chair with his hands loose between his knees, and he was looking at the floor with an expression she had never seen on him. She had seen him angry, the cold, compressed kind that was more frightening than heat. She had seen him under pressure in ways that made lesser men unravel. She had seen him dismiss and deflect and manage and control. She had never seen him at a genuine loss. "He called this line," Marco said from the window, "which means he had the number, which means he has more access than we've identified." Cassian's voice was quiet. Still. "There's a third pipeline." The words landed in the room. Alara thought about Nadia Orel's access being severed, about Rourke's confession, about the neat completeness of what they'd thought they understood an hour ago. "He built 3, she said. "He's been patient for 4 years, Cassian said. "He built as many as he needed." He looked up from the floor and his eyes went to Alara with a directness she wasn't prepared for. "I need to tell you something, before we go any further, before we plan anything or move anyone." Marco turned from the window. "The night my people dismantled the Voss operation," Cassian said. "The son, the 18-year-old, I was told it was unavoidable. I was told it was accidental. I accepted that." He paused. 3 months ago, I found evidence that it was not accidental, that there was a decision made at a level below me, by someone in my organization, to remove what was considered a future threat. He was 18, he had no operational role, and someone who worked for me decided unilaterally that he was a risk. His voice had not changed volume or tone. It was doing the thing it did sometimes when he was carrying something very heavy, becoming extremely still. "I've been trying to determine who made that decision for 3 months. I haven't been able to. The trail goes dead." He looked at her. "Dorian Voss lost his son to something that was done in my name, by my people, without my knowledge. And then no one in my world told him the truth." Alara held this. "You would have handled it differently," she said. "I would not have let an 18-year-old boy die for a calculation someone else made." His voice had the finality of a statement he'd been rehearsing for himself in private for a long time. "I would have found another way." "Does Dorian Voss know you didn't order it?" "No." A pause. "He has no reason to believe there's a distinction. From where he sits, it happened under my authority, and I never acknowledged it." The silence that followed had layers to it. Marco spoke first. "This is relevant to how we approach the next 72 hours. "Yes," Cassian said. "If Voss is operating under a fundamental factual misunderstanding, then everything he's built, the 4 years, the 3 pipelines, the leverage, all of it, is built on a premise that isn't entirely accurate." Cassian stood. He moved to the window and stood beside Marco, both of them looking at the curtain, neither of them lifting it. "He deserves to know the truth. I've known that for 3 months. A beat. But I couldn't find a way to tell him that didn't look like a tactical move, like I was trying to manage him." "You're trying to manage him right now," Alara said. He turned to look at her. "Yes," he said. "I am. I'm aware of the problem." She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had not opened the gate. The man whose organization had killed a boy and kept it from his father. The man who had spent 3 months knowing that and trying to find the clean version of accountability and discovering there wasn't one. She thought about what Marco had said in the forest. He lost Alara long before she disappeared. She thought he was right. And she thought the reason was partly this. Not the coldness, not the distance, not the other woman in the window, but this specific failure. The failure to say the true terrible thing when it costs something to say it. The habit of managing instead of speaking. The habit of looking for the clean version of an admission when the only version that existed was the raw one. "You have until tomorrow midnight," she said. "Yes." "Then we stop trying to find the clean version," she said. "Of any of it." He held her gaze. The third pipeline was still open somewhere. Voss was listening. Rourke's daughter was in a location none of them knew. Nadia Orel thought her access was intact. And somewhere in Cassian's organization, a third person was still in place, still feeding information, still invisible. Marco's phone buzzed. He read the message and his face did something that made Alara's chest tighten before he said a word. "They moved Rourke's daughter," he said. "An hour ago. New location, unknown. Rourke just got a proof of life call. She's alive. But the message that came with it was for Cassian." He looked up. "Voss knows we've identified the Nadia connection. Somehow he knows, which means the third pipeline is active and current and has been listening to this room." The three of them stood in a hotel room that had just become compromised, with a midnight deadline, a missing young woman, and the understanding that the enemy was closer than the walls. Cassian looked at Alara. "I need to make a call," he said, "but not from here, not from anything connected to the estate or my organization." His jaw was set and his eyes had found the specific quality she'd seen in him at his most dangerous. Not cold, not calm, but entirely resolved. "There's someone who might be able to reach Voss before midnight. Someone Voss trusts. Someone I never expected to ask for help." He paused. "His sister." Alara went very still. "Dorian Voss has a sister," Marco said slowly. "Serena. She cut contact with the family after the dismantling. We tracked her to the coast 18 months ago and determined she was no longer operationally relevant." "She's not operational," Cassian said. "She's principled, which is different." He looked at Alara. "And she reached out to me 8 weeks ago, the week you left. I didn't tell anyone." The room absorbed that. "She reached out to you," Marco said. "She told me Dorian was coming. She told me he had people inside and that she didn't know who, only that he'd been working it for years. She told me to protect the people closest to me." He stopped. A pause with the quality of a man acknowledging exactly what it meant. "I moved security protocols. I hardened the estate. And I—" He stopped again. The stop was the loudest thing in the room. "I did not think about Alara. She had left. I told myself she was safer outside my world than in it. I told myself the distance was protection." His voice had stripped itself of every managed quality. What was left underneath was something she hadn't heard from him before. "I was wrong. I made the choice that was easiest for me to make, and I called it strategy." Alara did not look away from him. "Call her," she said. "Call Serena Voss." "She may not—" "Call her," Alara said again, and her voice had the weight of someone who has decided to stop waiting for the clean version too. Cassian reached into his jacket and produced a phone she hadn't seen before. A different device, a third phone, the kind of compartmentalization that was either paranoid or exactly right, depending on how the night ended. He dialed from memory. It rang 4 times. Alara counted them. On the 5th ring, a woman's voice answered, quiet, alert. The voice of someone who picks up calls at this hour because they have been expecting one. "I was wondering when you'd call," the voice said. "I need your help," Cassian said. 3 words, no preamble, no management. A pause on the other end. "I know," Serena Voss said, "but first you need to understand something, Cassian. Something my brother knows that you don't." Her voice carried the weight of a person who has been holding a specific truth for a long time and has finally arrived at the moment when not saying it is no longer an option. "The man who gave the order to kill my nephew, the 18-year-old, the boy Dorian has spent 4 years making you pay for, that man is still inside your organization." Nobody moved. The phone was on speaker and Serena Voss's voice was still in the room, still hanging in the air between the 3 of them like smoke that hadn't cleared. And nobody moved because the information she had just delivered was the kind that rearranged the architecture of everything you thought you knew. "The man who gave the order to kill my nephew is still inside your organization." Cassian was the first to speak. His voice came out at a register she hadn't heard from him before tonight. Stripped of every layer of management down to something raw and fundamental. "Who?" "Not on this line," Serena said. "Not in your current location. You've been compromised twice tonight already. I'm not going to be your third." A pause. "I'll give you a location. Come alone. Not your man in the field, not your wife. Alone. 40 minutes. "That's not—" "Those are my terms, Cassian. You want what I know, you come alone. I have been watching my brother build this for 4 years, and I have been waiting for the moment when the damage could be stopped rather than redirected. That moment is now, tonight, but only if you trust me enough to walk through a door by yourself. Her voice was steady, not cold, the steadiness of a woman who has made a decision and passed through the fear of it already. I have a daughter too. She's 11. I walked away from my family's world because I didn't want her to grow up in it. I'm not going to start protecting that world now. Cassian looked at Alara. She looked back at him. Give me the location, he said into the phone. Serena gave it. A street address, a specific entrance, a time. Then she said, one more thing. My brother is going to contact you again before you get there. He'll have a new demand, something he's been holding in reserve. A beat. Don't agree to anything. Whatever he asks, say you need time. Buy yourself 40 minutes. Can you do that? Yes. Then move. She ended the call. Marco was already at the curtain, reading the street below without touching the fabric, the practiced peripheral reading of someone trained for exactly this. I don't like this, he said. Serena Voss spending 4 years at a distance and then surfacing tonight with a name she could have given us any time. She couldn't have given it before tonight, Alara said. Both men looked at her. Think about what she said. She was waiting for the moment the damage could be stopped rather than redirected. If she gave up the name 6 months ago, a year ago, Cassian removes the person and Voss adapts. He finds another pipeline, another angle. The structure doesn't collapse. She looked at Cassian. She waited until tonight because tonight is when all of Voss's pieces are in motion simultaneously. If you pull the name now, you pull the pin on everything at once. He loses the inside connection, the leverage on Rourke, the planned escalation against me, all of it at the same time. There's no room to recover. Marco was quiet for a moment. She's been coordinating this collapse, he said. Not a question. Something colder than a question. Not just waiting, actively timing it. Yes, Alara said. Which means Serena Voss has her own agenda for what happens after her brother's operation fails. People always do, Alara said. The question is whether her agenda and ours are compatible enough for tonight. Cassian picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He was moving with the particular efficiency of a man who has made a decision and finished processing it. Stay here, he said to both of them. Marco, I need you on the Rourke situation, his daughter's location, whatever secondary channels you have. If Voss moves her again, we need to be closer than we were last time. Cassian, Marco started. I know the risk. I'm taking it. He looked at Alara. The look lasted 3 seconds and carried more than 3 seconds worth of things he wasn't going to say in this room, in this moment, with Marco standing 6 feet away. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except Marco's voice. Don't use your phone. Either phone. I know how to stay put, she said. He held her gaze for 1 more second. Then he was gone. Out through the door, footsteps fading down the corridor, and the room felt different after he left it. Smaller, more exposed, the way rooms get when the person who takes up the most space in them walks out. Marco stood at the window and watched the street. Alara sat in the chair Cassian had used and put her hands in her lap and breathed. The photograph was still in her coat pocket. She'd been aware of it all night, the way you're aware of a stone in your shoe, constantly, with the low-frequency certainty that it was still there. She took it out now, unfolded it, looked at it in the low light of the hotel room, the grayscale image, the measurements printed along the edge, the small, bright form at the center that her body was already restructuring itself around. She looked at it for a long time. Then she folded it and put it back. Marco, she said. Yes. The third pipeline. The person who's been feeding Voss information from a channel we haven't identified. She looked at the ceiling. After Serena gives Cassian the name, the person who ordered the hit on the sun, how certain are we that that's the same person as the third pipeline? Marco turned from the window. He looked at her with an expression that told her this was not a new thought to him. Not certain at all, he said. So we might pull one name tonight and still have a leak we haven't found. Yes, she sat with that. How many people in Cassian's organization had the authority to order an operational hit without going through Cassian directly? She asked. At the time of the Voss dismantling? He thought about it. 4, maybe 5. Senior operations. The kind of position where Cassian delegated sufficiently that they could make field decisions in the moment. He paused. 3 of those 5 are no longer with the organization. 1 retired, 1 died, 1 was removed for an unrelated issue 2 years ago. Which leaves 2. Which leaves 2. He looked at her steadily. 1 of them is someone I've worked alongside for 3 years. Someone I would have said was solid. And the other? The other is someone Cassian trusts more than almost anyone still active. He turned back to the window, which is what makes this the worst possible version of the answer. They stopped talking. 22 minutes of quiet, the kind that has weight and texture, the kind where both people are running calculations they haven't finished yet. Marco kept his position at the window. Ilara kept her position in the chair. The hotel made its ambient sounds, HVAC, distant elevator, the faint texture of rain that had softened but not stopped. Then Cassian's name phone, the one he'd left because Marco had the secure line, buzzed on the table between them. Unknown number, Voss. Marco answered it on speaker without touching his own device. "He's not here," Marco said. A pause. Then Voss's voice, unhurried as it had been before, but with something underneath it now. A faint tightening, barely there, the sound of a man whose timeline has shifted and who is adjusting. "Then you'll relay a message. Tell Vale the terms have changed. I don't want the Meridian account structures anymore." A pause. "I want the person who killed my son. I want a name, a location, and I want them delivered, unprotected, before midnight." The voice paused. "If Vale gives me that, his wife goes free, Rourke's daughter goes free, and I disappear. My operation ends tonight, no more. This was never about money." The line went dead. Marco stared at the phone. Ilara stared at it. "He changed the demand," she said. "He already knows Serena told Cassian about the name," Marco said. His voice was very controlled. "That's the only explanation for the timing. He knows because—" He stopped. "Because the third pipeline heard this room. It heard Serena's call. It gave Voss the information in real time." "While we were talking," Ilara said. "Yes." "Then the third pipeline isn't just someone in the estate, someone with access to our current location, someone who knew about this hotel." She worked it through, the room. The hotel arranged by Marco. His network security contact, the one Rourke didn't know about. The one Marco had called to suspend Nadia's access. "Marco?" Her voice came out flat and careful. "Your network security contact, the one you used tonight." He went very still. "The one you've been using as a private channel for 6 weeks while you were running your own investigation." She kept her voice level. She was not accusing. She was working a load calculation, and the numbers were coming back wrong. "How did you make contact with that person originally, when you first started investigating the leaks?" Marco's expression had shifted to something she could only describe as the look of a man arriving at an answer he didn't want to reach. "Through the estate's internal referral system," he said slowly. "Standard process. Cassian's infrastructure. Which Rourke had access to. Which Rourke—" He stopped. "Which Rourke could have flagged for Voss 6 weeks ago when I started pulling threads." He turned to face her completely. "Voss didn't just build pipelines into Cassian's organization. He built a mirror, a secondary structure that reflects anything coming the other direction. Anyone inside investigating the leaks would have been flagged." He reached for his phone. "I have to call Cassian, right now. He's walking into Serena Voss's location thinking we're secure, and we are not." Cassian's secure line rang before Marco could dial it. Marco answered. Cassian's voice was immediate. "Get Ilara out of that room. Right now. Go." "What happened?" "Serena gave me the name. The person who ordered the hit on Voss's son. I have it." His voice was moving. She could hear footsteps, fast, and the ambient sound of outside air, rain, the specific acoustic of an open space. "I'm 30 minutes from you, but before I left Serena's location, she told me something else. The third pipeline. It's not someone who's been feeding information passively." A breath. "It's someone who's been actively guiding Voss's operation from inside, not just a leak. A partner." His voice tightened. "Marco, the location you booked tonight, how did you source it?" A beat of silence. Through a contact I established 6 weeks ago, Marco said carefully. That contact has been compromised since the beginning. A pause. Serena's intelligence shows the third pipeline initiated contact with Voss 14 months ago, well before Rourke. This person built the architecture that Voss used to recruit Rourke and Nadia. They are the original source. Everything else came after them. His voice was doing the specific compression of controlled urgency. I'm coming to you. But if Voss has your location, he won't wait for midnight. He'll move now. Get Alara out and move west. I'll send coordinates. Marco had already picked up the duffel. He was handing Alara her coat. She was already standing, the photograph safe in her pocket, the first aid wrapping on her knee, pulling tight as she put weight on it. Functional, painful, workable. They moved. Service elevator, same as before, but downward now, basement level, a corridor that smelled of cleaning fluid and old concrete. Marco had the duffel over one shoulder and his phone in his hand, and he was reading Cassian's coordinates as they walked, adjusting direction in real time, navigating a building he'd only been in for 40 minutes by instinct and floor plan logic. They came out through a loading dock onto an alley. The rain had lightened to the thin, persistent kind that doesn't soak you immediately but accumulates. The alley was dark, lit at one end by the overflow of a streetlight, and at the other by nothing. Marco went right, toward the dark end, which made her chest tighten until she understood. The lit end was visible from the street. The dark end emerged onto a secondary lane that connected to a parking structure 2 buildings over. They moved fast. Her knee was a metronomic pulse of pain with every step, steady enough now that she'd stopped registering it as an interruption and started treating it as information. Still weight-bearing, still functional, not getting worse. They were 20 feet from the end of the alley when a vehicle turned into it from the far end. Not fast, not aggressive, just present. Headlights filling the alley, pinning them both in the light, making the dark on either side absolute by contrast. Marco stopped. Alara stopped beside him. The vehicle, a dark SUV, no plates visible from this distance, sat with its lights on them and its engine running. Nobody got out. Back, Marco said quietly. They began moving back the way they'd come, keeping their pace controlled. Not running. Running was information. Running told the vehicle's occupants that the people in the alley knew what the vehicle meant. A second pair of headlights appeared at the other end of the alley. They stopped. Between the 2 vehicles, in an alley that was maybe 100 feet long and 12 feet wide, Alara and Marco stood with nowhere to go. Alara looked left. A door, service entrance, metal, the kind with a crash bar. She'd walked past it 10 seconds ago. She looked at Marco. He'd clocked it too. His chin moved, almost imperceptible, a quarter-inch drop, and return. Yes. She hit the crash bar with both hands, and the door gave, alarms be damned, and they were inside a stairwell, the door swinging shut behind them, the alarm beginning its electronic scream half a second later. Up, Marco said. They went up. 2 floors, 3, the alarm fading slightly with each landing. Or maybe that was just the adrenaline reordering her sensory priorities. Her knee was a sustained bright pain now, fully registered, no longer ignorable. She took the stairs in a rhythm that distributed the impact. Left foot lighter, right bearing more, the engineering mind finding the load path even here. Marco's phone buzzed. He read it without slowing. Cassian is 8 minutes out. He's sending 2 people to the building's front entrance. What building are we in? Commercial office. Probably empty. He pushed through a fire door onto the 3rd floor. Carpeted corridor. Dark, emergency exit lighting only. The amber-red glow of a building in night mode. We need to get to the front side of the building and away from that alley. They moved through the corridor. Alara was tracking sound. The alarm below them, still cycling, and below that fainter, the possibility of footsteps in the stairwell they'd just left. She couldn't be certain. The alarm made everything uncertain. She was certain about one other thing. Marco, she said, keeping pace with him, the name Cassian got from Serena, the person who ordered the hit on Voss's son. She was breathing harder than she wanted to be. Has he told you who it is? Not yet. He's going to tell us when he arrives. Yes. And when he does, when we know who it is, what's the play? She kept her voice even. Voss has changed his demand. He doesn't want money or information anymore. He wants this person, delivered, unprotected, before midnight. She paused. Cassian has to decide if he's going to give Voss what he's asking for. Marco didn't answer immediately. They reached a junction in the corridor, left toward the front of the building, right toward another stairwell. He went left. That's not a decision I'm in a position to make, he said. I know. I'm not asking you to make it. I'm asking you what happens to Rourke's daughter if Cassian decides he can't hand someone over to a man running a criminal operation, regardless of what that person did. She was not being rhetorical. She was being an engineer. She was looking at the structure and identifying where the failure points were before the load was applied. Because those are the actual stakes, not our survival tonight. Rourke's daughter's life against Cassian's decision about whether justice and leverage can coexist. Marco pushed through a door that opened onto the building's main lobby. Dim, empty, glass frontage showing the wet street outside. He looked at her. You've been thinking about this since the alley, he said. Since the phone call, she said. He looked at her with the expression she'd come to recognize as the one he wore when she'd arrived somewhere he'd been waiting. You know something, he said, about who the name is going to be. She looked at the glass frontage and the empty street and the rain and thought about everything Marco had told her. The 5 people with authority to order an operational hit without going to Cassian. 3 gone, 2 remaining. The one Marco would have called solid. The one Cassian trusted more than almost anyone still active. She thought about the person who had built the architecture Voss used to recruit Rourke and Nadia. The original source, Serena had told Cassian, 14 months before the others. Someone who had been inside long enough to understand how the organization thought, how it moved, how to build structures within it that wouldn't be noticed. She thought about Cassian's voice saying, I brought her in personally. I checked her references, her background. 3 years, Ilara said. Marco went very still. Nadia Orel joined the organization 3 years ago, Ilara said. Serena said the 3rd pipeline initiated contact with Voss 14 months ago. She looked at Marco. 14 months ago, Nadia would have been with the organization for about 18 months, long enough to understand the architecture, long enough to have identified Rourke as a viable target, long enough to know about me. She paused. But Serena said the 3rd pipeline built the system that Voss used to recruit Rourke and Nadia. If Nadia is one of the recruited, she's not the architect. She stopped. Let it land. The architect has been there longer. Someone who would have been in position during the original dismantling of the Voss operation 4 years ago. Someone who knew about the sun. Marco's face. She had been watching his face all night, and she knew what it looked like when he was ahead of her and what it looked like when she'd arrived somewhere he hadn't been yet. This was neither. This was the face of a man who had arrived at the same place and was devastated to confirm he had company. Say it, she said. I can't say it until Cassian confirms Marco. Her voice was flat and certain. I am 8 weeks pregnant, and I have been in a forest and 2 cars and a hotel room and an alley and a stairwell tonight. I have been surveilled, targeted, and chased. I am done waiting for confirmations on things I already know. She held his gaze. Say the name. He was silent for 3 seconds. Then he said the name. And it was worse than she'd thought. Not because she hadn't considered it. She had, in the last 30 seconds, she had circled it and approached it and looked at it from the side. But because once Marco said it, it became real. It became something that existed in the room and had weight. And the weight of it changed everything about the next hour. The front door of the lobby opened. Cassian came through it. 2 men behind him she didn't recognize. The 4 he'd identified as certain, his inner core. He was wet from the rain, moving fast, eyes going to Ilara first the way they had when he'd walked into the hotel room, the same immediate assessment, then to Marco. The alley, Marco started. I know, my people are handling it. Cassian's voice was the operational voice, the one that processed damage and moved forward. He came to where they were standing near the lobby reception desk and stopped. He looked at both of them. Serena gave me a name. Ilara said, We got there too. Cassian looked at her. The specific look of a man who has been surprised tonight more times than he built his identity around being surprised, and who has decided to stop being surprised by this woman's capacity to arrive at the truth. Then you know what Voss's new demand means, Cassian said. Yes, she said. He wants someone I trusted. His jaw was rigid, the muscle at the corner of it working. Someone who has been inside my organization long enough to have built a system I didn't see. Someone who gave the order that killed a boy, covered it up, and then used my organization to recruit 2 additional assets for the man that boy's death created. He stopped. His voice dropped half a register. Someone who was in the estate tonight when you arrived at the gate. The lobby was silent except for the rain on the glass and the distant cycling of the alarm from the floor above them. Marco said, "What are you going to do?" Cassian didn't answer immediately. He looked at the floor for a moment, then up, then at Alara. The look was not asking for permission. It was not asking for guidance. It was... She recognized it slowly, with the particular surprise of someone encountering a thing they'd wanted and stopped expecting. It was telling her the truth before he told anyone else. "I'm going to end this tonight," he said. "Not the way Voss wants. Not by handing someone over to him outside the law, regardless of what they did." His voice was absolute. "But I'm going to take them off the board completely, and I'm going to tell Dorian Voss the truth, all of it, every version of it, and let him make his own decision about what justice looks like when the person who hurt him most is no longer capable of hurting anyone else." "He might not accept that," Marco said. "I know." "He might escalate, Rourke's daughter." "I know." Cassian's eyes hadn't moved from Alara's. "I know what I'm risking. I know what it costs if I'm wrong about him." A pause. "But I think Serena reached out tonight because she believes her brother has been pursuing the wrong target for 4 years. I think she believes that if he gets the truth, the actual truth, not the version my organization let him build, he might stop." His voice was quiet, certain in a different way than his usual certainty. "I think she's been waiting for someone inside to be honest enough to give it to him, and I'm going to be that, because it's what I should have been 4 years ago." Alara looked at him. She thought about gates. She thought about what it cost a person to finally open them. "Then let's go," she said. Cassian turned to his 2 men. He gave instructions, quiet, rapid, precise. The waterfront facility Marco had identified as Voss's operational base, confirmation of Rourke's daughter's new location, which Cassian's network had partially triangulated from the proof-of-life call's cell signal. A timeline. A perimeter. A specific protocol for the approach that minimized exposure. Then he turned back to Alara and said, "You're not coming. I'm not staying in a lobby. I have a location, clean, no connection to anyone we've discussed tonight. 2 of my people will take you there. The person who built all of this is someone you trusted completely," she said, "which means your judgment about who is trustworthy has been operating with bad information for at least 3 years. Possibly longer." She held his gaze. "I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because you need to hear it before you walk into a building with people you're calling certain." A beat. "Take Marco. Take your 2 men. But don't leave me somewhere I can't move." The lobby held the silence of 7 people making various calculations. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," Cassian said. "Then keep me where you can see me." She looked at him steadily. "That's not weakness, Cassian. That's the opposite of what you've been doing for 4 years." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. They went. The waterfront was 20 minutes through rain-swept streets, 2 vehicles, Marco driving the first and one of Cassian's men driving the second. Alara sat in the back of the second vehicle and watched the city move past the windows and thought about the name Marco had said in the lobby, the name that was the original source, the architect, the person who had been inside long enough to build everything Voss needed. She thought about what it meant for Cassian, the specific quality of this betrayal, which was different from Rourke's fear and different from Nadia's recruitment. This was someone who had chosen it, proactively, who had given the order that killed an 18-year-old boy and then spent 4 years managing the fallout from inside, feeding the man that boy's death had created, using Cassian's own organization as the instrument of his destruction. It was the kind of betrayal that didn't just break a working relationship. It broke the premise of a person's judgment, their ability to trust what they saw in other people. She understood, in the car, that this was what Cassian had been carrying for 3 months since he'd found the evidence that the hit hadn't been accidental. Not just guilt about the boy. The much harder thing, the knowledge that someone he had been trusting, someone he still worked alongside, had done something he could not have imagined that person doing. The dissonance of knowing someone well enough to be certain they were solid, and discovering that the certainty itself was the vulnerability. She had spent 4 years married to a man and not known what he carried. She had spent 4 years feeling like she was outside a gate that wouldn't open, and not knowing that the gate was a symptom, not a cause. They pulled into the waterfront district. The buildings here were the industrial kind, old processing facilities, converted and reconverted, the kind of architecture that didn't apologize for its function. Water on 3 sides. A smell of salt and rust that the rain amplified. Marco pulled over a block from the facility and they got out. Cassian came to her window. He looked at her for a moment. "The car doesn't move until I come back for it," he said. "Marco stays with you." "No," Marco said. "You need me inside. You put someone else with Ilara." Cassian looked at him. A tense second. "Fine." He turned to the second vehicle. "Reyes, stay with her. The car doesn't move. Nothing happens to her." He looked back at Ilara through the window. The look was not the gate. The look was everything the gate had kept out. "Cassian," she said. "Yeah." "The truth," she said. "However it lands. The actual truth." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. He turned and walked toward the facility with Marco and one other man, and the darkness took them in 20 feet. Ilara sat in the car with a man named Reyes she didn't know, listening to the rain and the water and the specific silence of waiting, and she put her hand against her coat pocket where the photograph was, and she breathed, and she waited. 8 minutes later, the lights inside the waterfront facility went out all at once. The lights inside the waterfront facility went out all at once, and the darkness that replaced them was total and immediate, the kind of darkness that doesn't ease into itself but arrives like a verdict. Ilara counted to 3. Then she opened the car door. Reyes said, "Ma'am," and she was already out, already standing in the rain, already looking at the facility with its suddenly black windows and its silence that was not actually silence. She could hear from inside the specific sounds of a building where something violent was happening. Not shooting. Not yet. The sounds that come before shooting, movement, impact, the percussive thud of a body against a hard surface. Someone's voice cut short. "Stay in the car," Reyes said. He was out beside her now, one hand on her arm, not restraining her but present, a physical reminder that he had a job. "Something went wrong," she said. "Cassian's team can handle—" "Something went wrong with the lights," she said, deliberately. "Someone inside that building killed the power, and it wasn't Cassian." She turned to look at Reyes directly. He was younger than she'd clocked in the vehicle. Mid-20s, the kind of young that looks competent until the situation changes, and then you see the inexperience at the edges. "Do you have comms with them?" He touched his earpiece, listened. She watched his face, and what she saw there told her enough before he said anything. His expression did the thing that faces do when they're hearing something that doesn't make sense, and then the thing they do when they understand it does make sense, and they wish it didn't. "Marco's line is dead," he said. "Cassian's isn't responding." "The third pipeline," she said. "Whoever it is, they're inside. They cut power and comms simultaneously." She was already calculating. The facility's footprint. The entrances she'd clocked on the drive-in. 2 main, 1 service door on the waterfront side. If power was cut from inside, someone with facility knowledge had done it, which meant Voss had more infrastructure here than they'd mapped. How many people did Cassian send in? 3, Cassian, Marco, and Briggs. 3. Against whatever Voss had inside, plus whoever the third pipeline had brought. She looked at Reyes. "What's your protocol when comms go dark?" she asked. "Wait for visual confirmation or a prearranged signal. Don't breach without authorization." "How long do you wait?" He looked at the facility. He looked at her. 7 minutes. "That's too long," she said. "Those are the protocols." Reyes. She put her hand on his arm the way he'd put his on hers. Not restraining, just present. I understand what the protocols are. I'm telling you that the situation inside that building has changed from what those protocols were designed for because someone inside is working against your team, not just against us. 7 minutes is enough time for a lot of things to become permanent. She held his gaze. You don't have to breach. I'm not asking you to breach. I'm asking you to get it closer, find a sight line, and tell me what you see. He was quiet for 4 seconds. She could see him making the decision, the specific internal negotiation between training and judgment, between the rules and the situation that the rules didn't exactly fit. Stay behind me, he said. They moved. The waterfront side of the facility had a service road that ran along the water's edge, exposed to the wind off the harbor, the rain coming in off the water at a horizontal angle now. Alara pulled her coat tight and followed Reyes, keeping 3 steps back the way he'd indicated, her knees steady enough for this pace on flat ground. She could feel the photograph in her pocket with each stride. They reached the corner of the building. Reyes pressed himself to the wall and looked around it. Then he pulled back. Side door is open, he said. His voice had changed, quieter, a register lower. Someone came through it recently. The frame's damaged. Forced from inside or outside? He thought about it. Outside. The lock mechanism is bent outward. Someone had broken into the facility from the waterfront side, not Cassian's team, which had entered from the front. Someone else, who had arrived after Cassian's team was already inside. The third pipeline hadn't been inside the building. They'd been following Cassian's team here, waiting for the right moment, then entering from a secondary point to disable power and comms. It's a pincer, Alara said very quietly. Cassian's team went in the front, Voss's people were waiting inside, and then the third pipeline came in behind them through the side. They're boxed. Reyes looked at her. I'm going in, he said. I know. You cannot come. I know. She meant it. She was not going into that building. She was not going to add herself to the list of variables Cassian had to manage inside. But she needed Reyes to move, and she needed something in her hand first. Give me your spare. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and came out with a flat, compact secondary piece that he'd been carrying in a shoulder holster under his left arm. He held it out to her. Safety's here, he said, indicating. 13 rounds. She took it. It was heavier than she expected. She had not held a gun in her life. She did not tell him that. I'll be at the corner, she said. If anything comes at me from the roadside, I'll have enough warning to move. He nodded. Then he went around the corner and through the damaged door, and the darkness took him the same way it had taken Cassian 20 minutes ago, and she was alone at the corner of the building with a gun she didn't know how to use, rain coming off the harbor, and the sound of her own heartbeat doing exactly what hearts do when the situation has stripped away everything between you and the fact of being alive. She pressed her back against the wall. She breathed. She was thinking about Cassian inside the building. She was thinking about what the third pipeline meant in terms of numbers. Someone who had built the architecture of Voss's entire operation inside Cassian's organization was not a peripheral actor. They would have resources, capability. They would not have come to this building alone. She was also thinking about something Serena had said on the phone. My brother is going to contact you again before you get there. He'll have a new demand. Don't agree to anything. Serena had known the demand was coming, which meant Serena had known what Dorian Voss's actual final objective was. Not the Meridian accounts, not even the name of the person who killed his son. She'd known what he truly wanted because she was his sister, and she knew him, and she'd been watching him for 4 years. Dorian Voss wanted Cassian to stand in a room with him and account for himself. That was what 4 years of architecture had been building toward, not financial restitution, not the delivery of a subordinate. He wanted Cassian Vale in person, forced into a confrontation he couldn't manage or exit on his own terms. He wanted to look at the man whose organization had taken his son and say everything he'd been carrying, everything else, Rourke's daughter, Nadia, the pipelines, Alara on a highway in the rain. It was all construction. It was all scaffolding around the single load-bearing point of a father who had lost a boy and never received an answer. Alara understood this with the particular clarity of standing in the rain with no other distractions available. She hoped Cassian understood it too. Inside the building, something broke. A heavy sound, structural, a rack of equipment, a partition, something large going over. Then a shout, male voice, directive and hard. Then silence that had a different texture than the silence before. Then a single shot. Ilara stopped breathing. One shot. In a building where multiple parties were in conflict, one shot was impossible to interpret from outside. She pressed the gun against her thigh and held it there and counted seconds. And when she reached 30, she was still counting, which meant no one was screaming, which meant the situation had not collapsed into something unrecoverable. She kept counting. At 47 seconds, the lights inside the building came back on. She looked at the windows above her. Industrial pane, wire-reinforced glass, the amber yellow of interior lighting that was not an emergency system but the main power restored. Someone had turned the power back on. Someone who had enough control of the space to make that choice. She didn't know yet whether that was good or bad. She found out 11 minutes later when the service door opened and Marco came through it. He was bleeding from his left forearm. A cut, not a gunshot, long and deep but clotted already, his jacket sleeve torn. He was moving correctly, no favoring, which meant nothing else was seriously damaged. He saw her at the corner and crossed to her in 8 strides. "You're outside," he said. "Yes." "Reyes." "He went in about 10 minutes ago through the same door." Marco exhaled. "He found us. He's with Cassian now." He looked at her face, reading it. "Cassian is standing. 2 of Voss's men are down. Not dead, incapacitated. Briggs took a hit to the shoulder. He's mobile." He paused. "The 3rd pipeline is in custody." Ilara looked at him. "Who?" she said. "Cassian's head of security operations," Marco said. "Adrian Kell. 15 years with the organization. He gave the order on the boy. He recruited Nadia. He managed the system that leveraged Rourke. He came in through the service entrance behind us." He looked at her with eyes that were carrying a long night's worth of things. "He had a secondary weapon. Reyes took it from him before it could be used." A pause. "Cassian is talking to Dorian Voss right now." She looked at the door. "I need to be in there," she said. "Ilara, not to intervene, not to say anything." She looked at Marco with absolute directness. "Because Cassian asked me to stay where he could see me, and I need him to know I kept that." Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he held the door. She went through it. The interior of the facility was a large open processing floor, the kind of space that had probably held industrial equipment before it was emptied and turned into whatever Voss had been using it for. Planning, staging, the operational center of a 4-year project. It smelled of salt water and machine oil and the metallic sharpness of something recently broken. Emergency lighting had been supplemented by portable work lights someone had set up, their white-blue beams cutting the space into harsh sections. In the far section, 3 of Cassian's men were managing 2 of Voss's, professional, contained, the situation controlled but only recently. Briggs sat against a wall with his jacket off and his shoulder wrapped, his face doing the controlled compression of a man working through significant pain. Reyes was beside him, keeping watch. In the center of the floor, in the space the work lights converged on, Cassian Vale stood facing a man she had not seen before. Dorian Voss was older than she'd imagined from his voice. Late 50s, perhaps 60, with the physical quality of a man who had once been very strong and was still considerable, but who had been worn down by something that had nothing to do with age. He was standing, not restrained, standing freely, which told her this was deliberate, that Cassian had made a choice about how this confrontation would look. His face was carrying something that was too complex to be called a single emotion. He was looking at Cassian the way a person looks at a thing they've been approaching for 4 years and have finally reached, and now that they're here, the thing is not exactly what the approach had made it seem. Adrian Kell was zip-tied to a structural column 15 feet from the 2 men, sitting on the floor with his legs extended, his face doing the specific blankness of a person who has been caught so completely that effect has become meaningless. He was in his late 40s, dark-haired, and she registered now, seeing him in person for the first time in the context of everything she knew, that she had met him once. A brief introduction at the estate 2 years ago. He had shaken her hand and said something polite about her work and moved on. She stopped at the edge of the work light's reach and stood still and watched. Cassian was speaking. She could hear him from where she stood, but she did not move closer. She stayed at the edge and listened. "Not what I told you earlier," Cassian was saying. His voice was at the volume of a conversation, not a confrontation. "I told you the facts. I'm going to tell you what the facts mean, and then I'm going to stop talking and let you say what you came here to say." Dorian Voss was watching him with the quality of someone making a continuous, exhausting assessment. "The order that killed your son was not given by me," Cassian said. "It was given by the man behind me without my knowledge or authorization. That is a fact. I have evidence that establishes this, and I will give you that evidence in its entirety. Not because I expect it to give you what you've been looking for, but because you have spent 4 years operating on a premise that is not completely accurate, and you deserve to know that." He paused. "The second fact is that regardless of who gave the order, it happened within my operation, under my authority. The people who worked for me were my responsibility. That is also a fact. I am not telling you the first fact to escape the second." His jaw was tight. "I failed your son, not with intention, not with knowledge, but through the failure of oversight that allowed someone like Kell to make decisions I didn't know he was making." He stopped. "I don't know what the right version of accountability looks like in a situation like this. I don't think there is a clean version. I think there is only this, telling you the truth and standing here while you decide what to do with it." Dorian Voss was quiet for a long time. The facility held its breath. Ilara held hers. When Voss spoke, his voice had a different quality than it had on the phone. On the phone, it had been measured and deliberate. Now it was something else. Older, more fractured. The voice of a man who has been rehearsing something for 4 years and has just arrived at the moment of delivery and found that delivery is harder than rehearsal. "He was 18, Voss said. "Yes," Cassian said. "He was 18 and he didn't know anything about my business. I kept him out of it. I made that decision when he was small, that whatever I built, he would have nothing to do with it." A pause. "And they killed him for the threat of what he might become. Someone who worked for you decided my son's future was too risky, and they removed it." His voice broke on the last word, cleanly, the way a thing breaks when the material has been stressed for too long. He did not try to cover it. "He was 18. "I know," Cassian said. The words had almost no voice behind them. Voss looked at him for what felt like a long time. "I have spent 4 years building toward this moment," Voss said. "I built it to make you feel what I felt. The loss of everything at once. The person closest to you, gone, because of decisions made in your world." His eyes moved. One brief movement across the space, and he found Ilara standing at the edge of the light, and he looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not fully read. Then back to Cassian. "Your wife is here." "Yes," Cassian said. "I was told she was pregnant." "Yes," Voss looked at him. "I know what I was going to do," Voss said. "I know what the plan was. I've known for 4 years and I built it brick by brick, and every brick felt like justice." He stopped. He looked at the floor, then up. "Standing here is different than building toward here. I need you to understand that I came to this room intending to complete what I started, and I am—" He stopped again, swallowed. The specific physical effort of a man pushing something down that wants to come up. "I am telling you that I am uncertain, for the first time in 4 years. He looked at Cassian with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted and absolutely direct. "Because what you're describing, what that man behind you did to my son, is not what I thought it was. I thought you knew. I thought you made a calculation, and my son was on the wrong side of it." A pause. "If that is not what happened—" He stopped. "Then I have spent 4 years destroying myself to make the wrong man pay." The silence that followed was the most complete silence Ilara had ever been in. Cassian said, "What do you need from me to believe it?" Voss looked at him. "I need the evidence, all of it, and I need him—" He gestured toward Kell without looking at him. "I need him to answer for it, in a system with actual accountability, not delivered to me in an alley." He paused. "I am not my brother in terms of how I want this resolved. I want the truth documented, and I want the person responsible to face something that outlasts tonight." I can do that, Cassian said. And your wife, Voss said. This ends tonight. All of it. Rourke's daughter is released. I'm calling it now. He produced a phone and sent a message, 3 words, and put it away. It ends tonight, and I take nothing from you except what you owe me, which is the truth. Cassian nodded. Where is Serena? Voss said. Waiting, Cassian said. She wouldn't come inside. Something moved across Voss's face, an emotion that was complex and grief-colored and private. She reached out to you, Voss said. It wasn't quite an accusation. 8 weeks ago. She told me she would. She told me she wasn't going to let me finish this the way I planned to finish it. He was quiet for a moment. She's been trying to pull me back for a year. I told her she was choosing the wrong side. A pause. She told me there wasn't a right side, just a direction that leads back and a direction that leads forward. He looked at the middle distance for a moment. She was right. She is usually right. Something passed through his expression, a thing too tired to be love and too old to be anything else. She's outside. Yes. He moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back to Cassian one more time. I had a son, he said, and you had the power to prevent what happened to him, even if you didn't give the order, because he was in your orbit, because you created the world that made him a target. He held Cassian's gaze. I need you to carry that. I'm not asking you to be destroyed by it. I'm asking you to carry it, every day, as the price of the power you have. A pause. Can you do that? Cassian held his gaze without looking away. Yes, he said. Dorian Voss nodded once. Then he walked toward the door and through it, and the night took him. Cassian stood where he was for a moment. Alara watched him from the edge of the light, watched his shoulders come down a centimeter, watched his hands open and close once, watched the specific physical release of a man who has been braced for impact and has received something different than what he prepared for. She watched him turn and find her. He crossed the floor. He stopped in front of her. She looked at his face, the exhaustion, the damage of the night, the particular weight of a man who has been told to carry something and has accepted the assignment. You heard, he said. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. The gun she was still holding was between them, and she became aware of it and handed it back to him without comment. He took it without comment. Rourke's daughter, he said. Marco's coordinating the pickup. She'll be at a hospital in 40 minutes. His voice was the operational voice, but thinner now, worn through in places. Kell is going to be handed to people who will process him through channels that will hold. Serena Voss will be a witness. He paused. Nadia Orel is going to be dealt with through the same channels. She'll cooperate. Serena told me she was recruited under significant pressure. There are mitigating circumstances. Another pause. I'm not in the business of deciding how the law handles any of that. I'm handing it over and staying out of it. That's different, she said. Yes, he said. It is. They looked at each other. There was a lot that had not been said. There would be a lot that needed to be said over a period of time that she could not currently measure. The woman in the window, the gate, the 8 weeks of silence, the conversation she'd been rehearsing for 6 days that had been interrupted by a storm and a masked man in a drainage ditch. She did not try to have that conversation here. Not in this building, in these work lights, with Briggs nursing a shoulder wound 20 feet away and Marco on his phone, coordinating a young woman's safe recovery. But there was one thing she could say here. The photograph, she said. He went very still. She reached into her coat pocket and took it out. The ultrasound image, folded once, soft at the edges, 8 weeks old and carrying everything that word meant. She held it out to him. He took it. He unfolded it. He looked at it for a long time. His face did not do what faces usually do in scenes like this. Did not soften into something movie clean, did not produce the expected emotion in the expected form. What it did was something quieter and more specific. A man who has spent a lifetime treating control as safety, looking at a thing that cannot be controlled and choosing not to look away. Alara, he said. His voice was barely there. I know, she said. We have a lot to figure out. Yes. Not tonight. No. He folded the photograph back along its crease. He held it in both hands for a moment. Then he looked at her with the look she'd seen in the hotel room, the one where the seams showed. I'm going to ask you something, and you don't have to answer it tonight either. Okay. Give me the chance to show you that I understand what I got wrong. His voice was simple, not a negotiation, not a managed request. Not the gate, not tonight, the years before. The way I turned the people I loved into logistics problems. The way I confused protection with possession. He was looking at her the way a person looks when they've stopped preparing what they're about to say and are just saying it. I've been wrong about enough things in the last 12 hours to last a long time. I'd rather spend the time after this getting fewer things wrong than optimizing for whatever I thought I was optimizing for before. She looked at him. That's not a promise, she said. No, a promise would be me managing it. This is me telling you the truth. He held her gaze. That's the difference. I'm still learning what the difference feels like. She was quiet for a moment. So am I, she said. They left the facility an hour later, after the various necessary things had been handled with the various necessary people, Briggs transported, Kells secured, calls made to the kinds of contacts Cassian maintained in the legal and investigative structure of the city, the machinery of accountability set in motion in a way that would outlast tonight. Marco coordinated through a phone that needed to be charged and kept dying at critical moments, which under different circumstances would have been funny. Rourke's daughter was recovered at 11:41 that night from a storage unit in the Eastern District, locked in a room that had a cot and a heater and 3 days of food. Not comfortable, not humane, but not the worst version of what it could have been. Her name was Clara. She was 23 years old, and she was frightened and furious and physically unharmed. The first person she called before the paramedics had finished checking her over was her father. Alara was told about this by Marco in the car, and she said nothing for a while, and then she said, "Good," and meant it in the uncomplicated way that simple good things deserve. The hospital they took her to was a private facility on the north side of the city, the kind that Cassian's people had a relationship with for reasons she'd never inquired into and no longer felt conflicted about. A doctor checked her knee, cleaned and redressed, no structural damage, 2 weeks of limited walking recommended. And then a second doctor, younger, with the careful manner of someone who understood that the priority in the room was not the knee, asked her a series of questions and ran a brief examination and told her the pregnancy was progressing normally and that the exertions of the night had not produced any complications. She lay on the examination table after the doctor left and looked at the ceiling and let herself feel the specific relief of hearing the word normal in a context that deserved it. Cassian was in the corridor. She had told him to wait outside, and he had waited outside without argument, without managing, without sending someone in to report back. He had sat in a corridor chair for 40 minutes and waited. When she came out, he stood. "Normal," she said. His eyes did something brief and controlled, and then he nodded. "Good," he said. Like her. The uncomplicated version. They sat in the family area of the hospital wing, 2 chairs at an angle to each other, the institutional quiet of a medical facility at 2 in the morning, a coffee machine that produced something that resembled coffee, and a window that showed the city through rain that had finally gentled into something you could almost call ordinary. She told him about the conversation she'd been planning to have at the gate, what she'd been going to say, that she'd come to tell him about the baby and then leave, that she hadn't been coming back, that she'd wanted him to know but hadn't believed, standing in the rain looking at the closed gate, that knowing would change anything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I don't want to rebuild what we had," he said. She looked at him. "What we had didn't work," he said. "I want to build something that does, which is going to look different." He looked at the window. "I don't know what it looks like yet. I know what it requires from me. I know I haven't been providing it." He turned back to her. "I know that telling you I understand what I did wrong is not the same as demonstrating it over time. I know the difference between saying a thing and doing a thing. I know that you don't have any reason yet to believe I know the difference." "No," she said. "Then give me time to demonstrate it." She looked at him. She thought about what Dorian Voss had said to him on the facility floor. "I need you to carry that. every day. She thought about the way Cassian had looked back at him and said yes without qualifying it, without managing it, without finding the version of yes that cost less. She thought about the gate. She thought about this fact that she had spent 4 years outside a gate that she believed was a metaphor for what Cassian Vale was. Closed, controlled, available only on his terms. And she thought about the fact that the gate was not a metaphor. It was a failure of a specific evening, by a specific distracted man who had not looked at who was on the other side of the intercom. And all the other things, the coldness, the distance, the management of her, were real and serious and had to be addressed. But they were not irreversible. They were behaviors, not architecture. People changed behaviors. It cost them. The cost was real. But it was possible. She was an engineer. She understood the difference between a structural failure and a behavioral one. I'm going to stay somewhere of my own, she said. For now. I need space that's mine while we figure out what we're building. She held his gaze. That's not a rejection. It's a condition. The difference matters. I understand the difference, he said. And I'm going to need honesty. Actual honesty. Not the managed version where you give me the truth after you've figured out the best way to frame it. The raw version. Even when it's inconvenient. She paused. Especially when it's inconvenient. Yes, he said. That's going to be hard for you. Yes, he said again, with the quality of a man who was not making promises but making acknowledgments, and understanding that the acknowledgement was what she was asking for. She nodded. Outside the window, the rain had gone to mist, the fine suspension that sits between rain and clear and belongs to neither. The city was in it, half visible, its lights diffused. She could see the shape of things without their edges. The photograph, she said. I want it back. He reached into his jacket. He produced it and held it out. She took it and held it for a moment, and then, instead of putting it in her pocket, she set it on the arm of the chair between them. Neither of them reached for it. They both looked at it, the small folded rectangle of paper that had started the night. It's going to be a person, she said. Yes, he said. A person who will deserve better than what we've been, she said. Yes. Then that's what we're building toward, she said. Not for us, for that. She nodded at the photograph. We figure out how to be something worth inheriting. Cassian looked at the photograph for a moment, then at her. Okay, he said. It was not a grand thing to say. It was not the kind of word you built a speech around. But she had spent 4 years with a man who dressed everything in the language of certainty and control and the smallness of okay, the plain, unglamorous commitment of it, was something she could hold in her hands. 3 months later, on a morning with low winter light coming through the windows of the apartment she'd rented on the east side of the city, Cassian arrived at her door with a small package she hadn't been expecting. He'd called ahead, not to ask permission, to tell her he was coming, which was the distinction they'd been working on. She'd said fine. He'd arrived. The package was a frame. Inside the frame, behind glass, was the ultrasound photograph. He had not asked if she wanted it framed. He had not told her what it meant. He had simply done it and handed it to her and stood in her doorway and said, "If you don't want it on the wall, the frame still works as a standing one." She looked at the photograph behind the glass. The image she'd carried through a forest and 2 cars and a hotel room in a hospital, now still, now settled. She looked at him. He looked back at her the way he had in the hospital corridor at 2 in the morning, not managing it, not framing it, just looking. She stepped back from the doorway. He came in. The marriage they had was not the marriage they'd had. It was slower, costlier, built from the kinds of conversations that take longer because both people are saying the true thing instead of the convenient one. There were weeks that went better than expected and weeks that went exactly as badly as rebuilding requires. He came to her apartment rather than expecting her to come to him. She told him when he was reverting to management instead of honesty. He listened, which was the thing she'd believed for years he was incapable of, and had discovered he was capable of when the situation cost enough to require it. Rourke stayed. Not in his previous role. The breach had restructured things, as breaches do, but in a reduced capacity that Cassian had offered, and Rourke had accepted with the specific humility of a man who knows he doesn't deserve it and has decided to earn the proximity rather than claim it. Clara Rourke sent Ilara a note 3 weeks after the waterfront. She thanked her for the way the night had resolved. Ilara wrote back. They did not become friends, but they knew something true about each other, which is different and sometimes more durable. Nadia Orel cooperated with investigators and received a disposition that involved testimony and monitoring and no freedom in the conventional sense. Ilara did not feel uncomplicated about this. She'd met the woman 4 times and been mapped by her, and it was a violation she did not minimize. But she also knew enough about what pressure looked like from the inside to understand that the line between victim and perpetrator was not always the clean one. Adrian Kell did not receive a disposition of comparable leniency. Dorian Voss left the city. Serena told Cassian, in a final phone call, that her brother had gone somewhere coastal, somewhere quiet, somewhere that had nothing to do with operations or architecture or the 4-year construction project that had consumed him. She said he was not at peace. She said he was something more honest than peace. He was a man who had received the truth and was learning what to do with it. She said that was, for now, enough. In early spring, on a morning with clean light and a wind that had finally turned warm, Ilara stood in the apartment and looked at the framed photograph on the wall and thought about the night it had been folded in her pocket. She thought about the rain and the forest and the drainage ditch and the specific darkness of a deserted highway. She thought about a gate that hadn't opened. She thought about what had survived it. Not her marriage as it was, not the version of herself that had driven to that gate believing she already knew the answer. Not Cassian as he'd been, the controlled, wall-building, gatekeeping version that she'd spent 4 years trying to reach through. What had survived was something that couldn't have existed without the cost of the night it came from. The version of Cassian who sat in her doorway and said, okay, when she told him what she was building toward. The version of herself who had stayed at the edge of the work lights instead of crossing into the confrontation, not because she was afraid, but because she understood what her presence and her absence each meant and had chosen deliberately. The version of a story that ends not with a gate swinging open on cue, but with a person who has earned the right to knock and a person on the other side who has finally learned to look at who's there before they decide. She put her hand flat against the frame. The glass was cool. The photograph behind it was perfectly still. Outside, the spring light moved across the city the way it does when winter has finally finished, unhurried, as though it has nowhere else to be.